Okay, let's unpack this. We are about to do a deep dive into a text that is, well, it's just one of the foundational stories of speculative science. It feels less like fiction and honestly more like a chilling prophecy.
It really does.
Our focus today is Alexander Belyaev's classic, The Head of Professor Dowell.
And it is so unnervingly prescient, especially for its time. It gets right into one of the most profound biological and ethical fantasies imaginable.
Which is?
The successful but just profoundly disturbing sustaining of a conscious human head, completely separate from its body.
Right. So our mission today, as we dissect the sources, is sort of threefold. First, we have to really understand the biological explanation Belyaev gives us. I mean, the mechanics of how this terrifying life is even possible.
Exactly, the how. And then secondly, we have to explore the motivations, which are so intense, both for the scientist, the one driving this whole machine, and for the man who's trapped inside it.
And that brings us to the third point, which is really the core of the whole thing.
Yeah.
The ethical aspect. We have to analyze exactly where that line is. When does a scientific breakthrough cross over into, well, monstrous exploitation?
And the source material just lays it bare. You see it through the suffering of Professor Dowell, the boundless ambition of Dr. Kern, and then this cascade of other experiments that are just as tragic.
Our sources really do pull back the curtain on the entire architecture of this horror.
It forces you to engage with a really foundational question in the philosophy of science, doesn't it? I mean, when you manage to conquer these fundamental biological limits of life, do you kind of inevitably have to surrender human morality to do it?
That's the question. Let's spend some time really exploring how Belyaev frames that conflict. So let's start where the horror itself starts, with the cold, hard mechanics of this fictional biology. If you're going to actually do this, if you're going to keep human consciousness alive and functioning, what kind of specific infrastructure does Belyaev's text say you need?
Right. Because the descriptions we get of the apparatus, they are anything but subtle.
Not at all.
They're intense, yes, but that intensity, it serves a crucial purpose. It grounds this really fantastical premise in something that feels, I don't know, almost plausible, or at least procedural.
It gives it a sense of realism, even if it's horrifying.
Exactly. Belyaev makes it very clear that sustaining this head isn't some simple thing. It's a full-on, high-maintenance biological engineering project. The head is perpetually connected to this complex array of mechanisms.
The sources keep calling them pumps and apparatuses, right? The Russian word, oaga.
Yes. And this infrastructure is basically replacing every major system the body usually handles on its own, automatically, every single one.
So we're talking about a machine that has to substitute for the heart, the lungs, the kidneys, the liver, all at the same time in a continuous loop. That is just an astronomical amount of biological function to replicate.
It is. It's astronomical. And if you look closer at those risks, you start to realize the sheer scope of it all. Just think about the cardiovascular demands for a second.
Okay.
You'd need precise control over blood pressure, over volume, temperature. All the things the body's natural systems, hormonal feedback and so on, are gone.
Mm-hmm.
The pumps have to mimic the heart's rhythm, but way more subtly.
Why more subtly?
Because they're only perfusing the brain tissue, which is incredibly sensitive to any kind of pressure fluctuation. I mean, a tiny miscalculation, just a slight one, and Professor Dowell's brain is either starved of oxygen or it's flooded.
And either way, that means immediate death or just catastrophic brain damage.
Instantly. It's a constant, delicate dance.
So that's the pressure regulation. But if this life support is basically a big external circulatory system, what are the key fluids that Belyaev says are needed to keep this consciousness going?
The text specifies two critical elements above all else. First, constant nourishment. And second, the uninterrupted circulation of life fluids. The components he specifically calls out are the continuous delivery of blood and lymph.
Blood and lymph.
Right. And this dual citation, the fact that he includes both, is actually one of the most fascinating scientific details in the whole book.
Okay, so why is the inclusion of lymph so significant? I mean, we all get why you need core, blood, oxygen, glucose, all of that. But lymph, that's a detail that often gets overlooked, right?
It gets overlooked all the time in this kind of sci-fi.
Hmm.
And it shows this surprisingly detailed, even if it's speculative, biological insight for a novel written in the early 20th century. Lymph is the fluid that, it drains waste, excess protein, pathogens from the tissues. It manages the whole fluid balance.
So without it?
If Kern was only supplying blood, the brain tissue would just swell up. You'd get massive edema, incredible pressure, and then cellular death. By including Belyaev acknowledged the need for tissue fluid balance and waste removal. It implies this whole closed-loop system that doesn't just feed the brain, but meticulously cleans it too.
That one word elevates it from simple fantasy to, like you said, really considered speculative biology.
It really does.
So we have the circulatory and the cleansing systems mapped out. But let's go back to the most immediate threat after decapitation. Respiration. How is breathing, or I guess oxygenation, maintained?
Absolutely. The lungs are gone. So respiration has to be completely mechanized, forced. The text is very clear about the necessity of oxygen tanks or autonomy.
So the external machine has to act as an artificial lung.
It has to. It's probably using something like an external membrane oxygenator, which was, highly speculative technology when Belyaev was writing, to continuously infuse the circulating blood with oxygen before it ever reaches the brain. This whole process is non-negotiable.
Without it, Dowell's consciousness would just blink out.
In moments, he'd be gone.
The whole technical description, it just paints this picture of extreme fragility. The success of this entire project rests on the flawless 247 operation of this, this Rube Goldberg machine of life support.
It does. And the sources also define the physical setting of this existence. The head is resting in a special environment. Sometimes it's called a tube, a shoe, or just on a special table. The key takeaway is the dependence.
Total dependence.
Total. The head is immobile, it's fixed, it's completely at the mercy of this external mechanical infrastructure. It's not just surviving, it's being surgically and mechanically held in a specific state of being.
It sounds less like some groundbreaking medical ward and more like a bizarre factory that's dedicated solely to biological maintenance.
That's a great way to put it. And that infrastructure, that factory, it brings us right to the central biological paradox of the entire experiment.
The paradox of function.
Exactly. Biologically, the machine is a stunning success. A horrific one, but a success. All the functions you need for basic survival circulation, oxygenation, nutrients, they're all maintained externally. The cells are alive, the brain is metabolizing. But
the disconnection from the body is absolute.
It's absolute. The brain is the organ that processes the world, and yet the world is almost entirely cut off from it.
All the motor functions, all the sensory input that rely on the body, just severed.
Gone. The head retains only sight, hearing, memory, and most critically, consciousness. It can see the lab, it can hear Dr. Kern, but it can't participate. It can't move, it can't taste, it can't feel.
And that creates this unique kind of horror, doesn't it? A profound biological incompleteness. The brain is fully functional, it's capable of complex thought, of memory, but it's totally paralyzed and muted.
The function becomes entirely internalized. The machinery keeps the lights on, it ensures biological viability, but it completely strips away the capacity for any kind of meaningful embodied life.
It's like Kern preserved the software but ripped out all the hardware.
That's it, exactly. He ripped out all the inputs and outputs, leaving the mind just running in this endless loop of observation and total powerlessness. This transition from a complex, autonomous person to this high-maintenance, static specimen. That's the first stage of the trauma we have to talk about.
It's the foundation for the internal suffering of Professor Dowell.
And it's interesting, by isolating the brain, Kern might have unintentionally made Dowell more aware of his confinement.
How so?
Well, think about it. He's removed from all the distractions of the body. Hunger, fatigue, physical needs, they're all taken care of by the Britico. So the mind has nothing left to do but contemplate its own terrifying situation.
It's a kind of hyper-conscious, sterilized existence where the only remaining sensation is the knowledge of his imprisonment.
Yes, and that intellectual intensity, fueled by the memory, the shadowgrime of a whole life, combined with total isolation. It just makes the psychological horror uniquely potent.
Okay, so we've established the mechanical foundation of this life. Now let's turn the lens inward. Let's move from the structure to the man inside it, Professor Dowell himself. The biological success, as we said, created a psychological nightmare. So how does the professor actually describe his existence?
His existence is defined by this sense of just profound violation, both philosophical and physical. He describes his state not as a life that's been saved, but emphatically as internal imprisonment.
So the glass tube and the pumps, those are just the symbols of the prison.
They're just the outer walls. The real torment is internal. His mind, his sense of self, his intellectual drive, all of it is perfectly preserved, completely aware of the world around him, and crucially, aware of his total physical paralysis.
That lack of agency, the huge chasm between wanting to do something and being completely unable to, that has to be the most agonizing part.
It's the ultimate form of powerlessness.
To have total will but zero external capacity.
It is the defining horror of the novel, the total lack of agency and the inability to act. His mental life is completely intact. He can think, judge, plan, remember with perfect clarity, but he's trapped.
He can't even shift his gaze.
Can't even do that. Imagine wanting to just look away from the person torturing you, or wanting to scream, or even just sign your name, and being physically unable to do any of it. It's a denial of the most basic human autonomy.
He can't even communicate the fact that he's suffering without this extreme, monumental effort.
Exactly. And yet, even in this static, paralyzed state, Dowell develops this powerful motivation that drives the whole narrative forward.
Which is?
The desperate need for communication and for justice. He can't just accept being a passive specimen. We see it in the text. His desperate struggles to just move his lips to try and utter sounds.
He strains to form the names, right? Marie. Kern.
Yes, and that shows the almost superhuman effort it takes to bridge that gap between his trapped mind and the mechanical voice that eventually speaks for him. This isn't just about speech, it's a fight for validation.
It becomes an existential motivation then. It's
Yeah.
moved way beyond just survival. It's about reclaiming his identity.
Absolutely. His drive centers entirely on being recognized as a person,
Yeah.
not just an object of study. His constant mental vigilance is fueled by this desire for justice. He has to expose Kern, reclaim his work, and assert his own dignity.
The betrayal by his colleague and the theft of his work seem almost as motivating for him as the violation of his body.
I think they are. The intellectual injustice just compounds the physical horror. It makes his confinement doubly unbearable.
The idea that his body is gone, but it's the theft of his life's work that really pushes him to fight back, that feels profoundly human. It suggests that for him, his intellectual contribution is a stronger definition of his self than his physical form ever was.
It really is. And Belyaev makes this struggle even more complicated by showing us that this intense state of hyper-awareness is completely unsustainable.
What do you mean?
The source mentions the necessity of him suppressing his own consciousness just to cope, which is a fascinating and just terrifying psychological survival mechanism, isn't it?
It speaks to this deep, primal form of emotional suffering. If the reality of your confinement is constant, total, and agonizing, how do you stop your mind from just shattering?
The only way is self-imposed mental dormancy. Dowell literally describes needing to suppress his consciousness, to dim his own awareness, to enter this kind of waking sleep just to deal with the torment.
He's using his own powerful mind as a shield against itself.
Yes, it's a survival mechanism against the very condition that science engineered for him. Kern successfully kept the brain alive, but Dowell's choice to suppress his GC is the ultimate rejection of the life Kern forced on him.
He chooses a temporary mental absence over a perpetual powerless presence.
And that's such a masterful piece of characterization by Belyaev. It adds this layer of depth. Dowell isn't just screaming into the void, he's calculating. He's calculating his survival and his potential for action. His vulnerability is also his strength.
Because that suppressed consciousness means he's conserving his energy and his focus for the one moment he might finally be able to communicate and get justice.
And this choice, the choice to sort of check out mentally, it makes him the perfect victim for Kern in the short term. A passive subject is much less likely to expose the truth.
But that suppressed consciousness is just waiting.
It's waiting for the opportunity for revolution. The professor's reality is this torturous mental landscape that's only bearable when he chooses this self-imposed oblivion. And that vulnerability, paradoxically, is what Kern is counting on to maintain his secret.
Which brings us perfectly to the architect of this whole torture chamber, Dr. Kern, and the ethical void that drives his entire project.
Dr. Kern is not just an ambitious scientist. He is the embodiment of scientific hubris, completely unbound by any sense of common morality or even, relational duty.
He's the master engineer who transforms his own mentor's life-saving work into a biological prism.
And his primary motivation, according to all the sources, is not the advancement of human health or even pure discovery. It's something far more, base and corrosive.
What's fascinating is how clear Belyaev is on this point. The core driving force, cited over and over, is glory and achieving this world-changing scientific breakthrough.
And that ambition is absolute. It completely overrides every ethical, relational, and human consideration.
Yeah.
The fact that Dowell was his mentor, the person who likely taught him everything, that just deepens the moral failure.
Kern weaponizes this life-saving technique for his own personal narcissistic gain.
He does. Let's talk about that ambition. That inalako, it's such a powerful word. It implies not just, money, but historical permanence, immortality through reputation. And that single-minded goal completely informs how he views Dowell.
It dehumanizes him.
Completely. Kern views the head explicitly as his tool, his tool for further research. And a tool is inanimate. It has no rights, no will, no dignity. By reducing his former mentor, a man of profound intellect, to an ethiko, Kern justifies the exploitation.
The irony is just staggering. He's using Dowell's surviving genius to steal Dowell's own genius.
That's it in a nutshell. And if his goal is a do, then exposure is the ultimate threat to that. It's why secrecy is so critical to his whole operation.
Absolutely. The need to maintain absolute secrecy, the Santre Apico, is paramount for him. And this isn't just about protecting proprietary information, is it?
No, it's about preventing public exposure of his monstrous methods. If the world knew that the head was conscious, that it was suffering, that it was a victim of intellectual property theft, Kern's Huan would instantly be seen as a grotesque crime.
His entire legacy hinges on keeping the truth locked away in that hidden lab.
Let's break down the ethical violations here because they're so layered. It all starts with the professional betrayal.
First and foremost is the theft of intellectual property.
Right. The head explicitly accuses Kern of stealing the discovery, the method of train. This isn't just a physical violation, it's a professional and moral betrayal of the highest order. Kern is taking credit for this monumental achievement, while the true originator is forced to watch it happen silently, trapped in the very machine that enables the crime.
It just fundamentally undermines the entire spirit of scientific collaboration.
And then on top of that, you have the violation of basic autonomy and consent, which is, the cornerstone of all modern medical ethics.
Right. The lack of consent and exploitation. Dowell is being kept alive against his explicit will. He's being used solely for purposes that serve Kern's fame and research, not his own benefit.
And that's the moment the scientific achievement just plummets into an ethical abyss. Belyaev frames the act of sustaining Dowell's life not as a medical miracle, which is what Kern tries to claim it is, but as a cruel, ongoing experiment. It violates Dowell's dignity and autonomy at the most fundamental level possible.
It raises a really profound question. Does the ability to sustain life grant you the right to possess that life? If Kern has conquered death, does he now own that specific consciousness?
That is the power dynamic at play. Kern has to manage Dowell's consciousness like it's a volatile asset. If Dowell were to publicly communicate the truth, Kern's breakthrough instantly collapses into a scandal and a criminal indictment.
The success of the science is completely inseparable from the crime of its execution.
So Kern is in this constant state of anxiety, knowing that a single utterance from Dowell could cost him everything.
That pressure cooker environment, this enormous technical achievement, contrasted with the desperate need for secrecy, that's what creates the tense atmosphere of the whole story.
Yes. Kern has the ability to grant this horrific form of pseudo-immortality, but he only uses it to silence and to steal. And as we see in the sources, an ambition like that is never satisfied with just one experiment, is it?
No. Once the technique is proven, the scale has to increase.
Exactly. The success with Dowell validates the methodology. And for a man who is driven by a Jew, the next logical, horrifying step is replication and expansion. He needs more proof, more material, and more opportunities to perfect his technique.
And this is where the narrative really shifts, isn't it? It goes from the personal tragedy of Professor Dowell to a much more systemic moral horror. Kern's success proves the viability of the technique, and his ambition just dictates that he has to expand his material.
This expansion is so crucial because it demonstrates that Kern's ethical failure isn't a one-off thing against a mentor. It's a repeatable, standardized process of exploitation, and the most detailed subsequent subject is Brigitte.
A woman whose revival introduces these new complexities about consciousness itself.
It does. When she's first revived, the description is incredibly telling about what Kern thinks he has actually captured. The sources describe her as lacking a soul or any higher consciousness.
She only shows primitive reactions, also. What does that initial state imply about Belyaev's understanding of the mind-body relationship?
Well, this distinction is philosophically explosive. If the brain is functional and the uiters are circulating, yet she's described as Aishua, Belyaev is suggesting something really interesting.
What's that?
He's suggesting that the immediate aftermath of reanimation might only capture the brainstem functions. the basic cognitive hardware, but not the integrated personality, not the soul. She has primitive reactions, responses to pain, maybe, or basic reflexes, but no self-awareness, no memory, no identity.
Which gives Kern this terrifying, if brief, ethical shield.
Exactly. He can claim he's just working with an automaton, not a person. It allows him to delay confronting the moral implications. For a short time, he's just working with a biological machine.
But the truly terrifying step happens when she starts to recover.
Yes. Her gradual recovery of consciousness, or at least partial consciousness, and then her ability to speak. Once Brigitte can communicate, she represents the capacity to inflict suffering being extended and replicated. She becomes fully aware of her static existence.
And she's now capable of participating in Kern's manipulation, maybe even providing information or performing tasks for him.
She is systematically turned into another subject of his cold, calculated experimentation. Her case validates the technique for replication and proves that consciousness can potentially be recovered post-trauma.
Which, from Kern's perspective, is the greatest scientific success. But from a moral standpoint, it's just the capacity for greater evil.
It is. And this expansion isn't limited to individuals of, scientific importance. It moves into the realm of the arbitrary. We get this brief, chilling mention of reviving a laborer's head. And that simple, stark detail is arguably one of the most morally damning in the entire narrative.
I think so, too.
Why is the laborer's head so significant compared to Dowell, who was a renowned scientist?
Because it removes the exceptionalism. Dowell's tragedy was rooted in professional betrayal, in intellectual property theft. The laborer's tragedy is rooted in sheer commodification. It shows Kern's indiscriminate use of human material, regardless of background or social status.
Life or conscious existence has just become a disposable commodity to him. Raw material. Raw material for his relentless research. He is no longer exploiting a colleague. He is exploiting anyone he can get his hands on, reducing human remains to mere laboratory resources. It's the ultimate dehumanization.
It transforms the laboratory from a place of a singular, ambitious crime into a production line of bioethical violation.
It shows the technology is replicable and the lack of morality is scalable. And if you look at the trajectory of Kern's ambition, all of these reanimations, they're just stepping stones.
They're just practice.
They're practice. They allow him to perfect the life support system and maybe the nerve connection techniques that he needs for the ultimate radical goal that the sources reveal.
Which moves way beyond simple reanimation into total biological control, transplantation.
Yes, the source mentions the ultimate goal of transplanting a head onto a new body. This confirms that his entire suite of experiments, Dowell, Brigitte, the laborer, they're all just preparatory studies.
He's not satisfied with just sustaining consciousness in a tube.
Not at all. He aims to conquer death entirely by achieving biological transfer and re-embodiment.
The ambition there is just immense. It pushes the absolute boundaries of biological, surgical, and ethical limits. It suggests a future where immortality is possible, but
potentially only under the complete coercive control of the scientist who holds the method. The power dynamic becomes absolute.
If Kern perfects transplantation, he becomes a godlike figure.
He can decide whose consciousness survives, whose body is used, whose identity is maintained or extinguished. This kind of power, achieved through theft and exploitation, guarantees an ethical catastrophe. The initial terror of the pumps and the lymph has now metastasized into the terror of total biological dictatorship.
It is the ultimate erosion of boundaries, and this expansion of horror, it requires the narrative to find some kind of moral check, right? A mechanism to stop the escalating madness.
Which brings us to the crucial role of the assistant.
Yes. The assistant character, whether we call them Marie or Lorraine from the sources, serves as that necessary moral catalyst. They're initially pulled into Kern's orbit, maybe out of fascination with the science, or just ignorance of the full cruelty.
But they can't maintain that complicity indefinitely.
The sources refer to the assistant eventually developing this deep compassion for Dowell's plight, and that human empathy is the force that finally breaks Kern's scientific bubble.
That is the spark. It's the spark that ignites the moral reckoning. The assistant transitions from being a simple lab tech to a crucial ethical agent. By witnessing Dowell's profound suffering, the ages, and then the exploitation of Brigitte and the laborer, they just can't maintain their professional distance anymore.
They become the crucial link. They act as the voice and the advocate for the head.
Defying Kern, providing information, enabling communication. Their motivations shift entirely to justice and moral conviction. They choose Dowell's personhood, his core, over Kern's quest for.
And the moment Dowell can truly communicate his truth, Kern, this great scientific mind, is just reduced to a panicked criminal. What is his primary frantic fear during this confrontation?
His primary fear is exposure. It's the immediate dismantling of his legacy. The text mentions his constant worry that the world is not ready for his discovery if it's presented alongside the ugly ethical reality of it all.
He understands human morality well enough to know the public will condemn the methods, regardless of the staggering scientific achievement.
Absolutely. And that establishes the central conflict of the climax, the tension between the secret scientific triumph and public moral accountability.
So the moment Dowell speaks, the ethical framework just takes precedence over the scientific one. And how did that conflict manifest in Kern's behavior? We see this complete breakdown of his controlled scientific facade.
It becomes extremely volatile. The conflict reaches its peak when the head gains the ability to communicate meaningfully and expose Kern's thefts and abuses. This leads to these frantic efforts by Kern to maintain control, to silence the truth.
The sources describe violent reactions.
Violent. He's shown smashing equipment, shouting "fool" at Dowell or his assistant. This demonstrates the complete and total breakdown of his veneer of clinical detachment. The calm, calculating scientist just disappears.
And he's replaced by a desperate man facing ruin and criminal prosecution.
It's the sheer human desperation underneath all the ambition. He's been so long controlling the biological situation, but he completely failed to control the human element, Dowell's will and the assistant's conscience.
Exactly. The struggle for control quickly escalates into a battle for his own physical and legal survival. He tries to silence or destroy the evidence, the heads, the knowledge, the unauth themselves.
It shows his desperate need to protect his reputation and, ultimately, his freedom from prosecution. Manomor he realizes that his ability to wield this power of life and death relies entirely on maintaining total, murderous secrecy.
And Dowell's voice, which is facilitated by the assistant's moral courage, becomes the single instrument of his ruin.
So the emotional and ethical breakthrough, Dowell finding his voice, the assistant finding their moral conviction, that is the force that ultimately brings down this scientific empire built on exploitation.
The narrative structure proves that the greatest technological advancement is worthless if it violates human dignity.
Belyaev uses this climax to reinforce that. No scientific achievement, no matter how monumental, can survive when it's built on a foundation of profound human and ethical violation. Dowell and the assistant force the issue of dignity and autonomy back onto the scientific stage. They demand that the world acknowledge the cost of this ega.
They make it impossible for Kern to claim his ega without also claiming the criminality that came with it.
And what's interesting is that even the biological feasibility, the saya and the jaya and the se, they become instruments of moral weight. That carefully sustained life is now evidence in a moral trial.
They are exhibits A, B, and C of the crime. The complex biological infrastructure, which we talked about at the start, is simultaneously the evidence of Dowell's prolonged suffering and the physical manifestation of Kern's theft and control.
And the fact that the process is so intricate, that it requires such constant attention and observation, that's also what allowed the assistant the time and the proximity to develop the op you needed to act. The technical complexity enabled the moral intervention.
So we've taken a deep dive into the excised world of Professor Dowell, really dissecting Belyaev's chilling masterwork through the stack of sources we had. We started by unpacking the sophisticated, albeit fictional, biology required to sustain a separated head.
Right, the crucial, tireless role of the istia, the specific need for abia, and that constant mechanical oxygenation that kept the life ticking.
We then explored the devastating subjective reality of Professor Dowell, who endured what he called monomosity, demonstrating that biological success can result in deep psychological torment.
And his motivation wasn't just survival. It was a desperate quest for recognition as a person, and for justice against the theft of his core. His ability to suppress his own inchina was his last defense against madness.
And finally, we dissected the profound ethical failure embodied by Dr. Kern, whose singular ambition for Etrina drove him to exploit his mentor, steal his work, and then replicate the cruel experiment with subsequent subjects like the conscious Brigitte and the anonymous Watchel.
And these were all just horrifying stepping stones toward his ultimate goal of achievement of justice.
This deep dive really serves as a stark reminder that scientific power is neutral, isn't it? Its morality is defined entirely by the intention of the people who wield it.
The technology to sustain life is merely a tool, and a cheva. The core question remains how and why we choose to use it, and at whose expense. The conflict between Kern's relentless drive and the assistance necessary Wuzno is Belyaev's profound commentary on human nature.
So, we'll leave you with this provocative thought drawn from the deepest, darkest corners of scientific possibility. If science could truly conquer death by reducing consciousness to a biological function, maintained perpetually by pumps and tanks, would humanity truly gain eternal life?
Or would we simply create a new, terrifying definition of eternal powerless slavery, where physical form is merely optional and consciousness is a manufactured state controlled by the most ruthless ambition?
We have to consider whether the conquest of biological limits inevitably leads to the erosion of ethical boundaries, and what the true cost of yi is when it's purchased with human dignity.